שבדרך כלל אני הולכת כאן בסטודנטים שלי, וזה כללי, אז נרדם פה על בסוף.
בסדר, אני לא אגיד שום דבר.
תגיד משהו, זה
יחידי שלא מבן גוריון. אבל מה פי שווייק שלי?
ממש, אתה נכון, זה עוד עכשיו, ואני אומרת לו כן, ואני אומרת לא, אבל כן, אבל הוא שלנו, אחרי אנשים שלושתנו נמכס אין יותר.
אני כתבתי לך.
היא אמרה לי שהלכה לחפש האנשית שלה. היא כנראה הספיקה למחשב אותה.
אני פשוט עוד כיסאות הנה רותי, בצד? לא הכרתי מצלב זה אפשר באמת שכי לסגור את הדלת ואפשר תציג פה
שלום לכם, שלום לכולם. ראש מרכז רב לחקר השואה, ואני שמח מאוד לראות את כולכם באירוע הזה שלנו על היום שמוקדש לשואה באפריקה. אני אעבור לאנגלית. I'm very proud to have as our guest of honor Professor Omar Boum from the University UCLA, California, and we'll be opening with our lectures and discussions on Shoah, the Holocaust, and Africa, the intersections also between the Holocaust and colonialism. I have the pleasure of presenting our Dean, Professor David Wettstein, to open our session.
Thank you very much, Jackie. אתחיל בעברית ועבור לאנגלית. אז שומעים אותי? כן. אז שלום רב לכולן וכולם. אני מקדיש את ברכתי לסבותיי וסביי ולארבעה דודיי ולדודתי שנספו בשואה, לאמי שעזבה את לימודיה בווינה וברחה ללונדון ב-1938, ולאבי שנולד בגיל 17 מוויליצ'קה בפולין לסיביר והיה יחיד במשפחתו ששרד את השואה. המפגשים שבהם אנחנו נותנים חלק הם פרי שיתוף פעולה בין מחלקות ותוכניות בפקולטה לרוח וחברה. יש חוקרות וחוקרים בפקולטה מ-UCLA, חוקרים מאוניברסיטת בן-גוריון והאוניברסיטה הפתוחה. המפגש הזה מתואם ומאופשר באמצעות מרכז אסתר וסידני רב ללימודי השואה והתקומה. וכעת אעבור לאנגלית. Now I'll switch to English. Dear participants and guests from far and near, welcome to Yom HaShoah Holocaust Remembrance Day event focusing on the Holocaust and the African continent. I was very thrilled to see the list of departments and entities working together to create this event. 3 departments from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences here at Ben-Gurion University, Sociology and Anthropology, African Studies, and Middle East Studies. And of course, with the help of the Esther and Sidney Raab Center for the Holocaust Studies. Special thanks are due to Professor Omar Boum, the Morris Amado Endowed Chair in Sephardic Studies from UCLA. I'm sorry I missed your lecture today. I did have the opportunity to go through the impressive list of books and articles you've published. I want to mention a few, just a few. In addition to the book, The Holocaust in North Africa, co-edited with Sarah Stein, I came across The Undesirables book, a historical graphical novel by you and Najib Berber, that introduces the pain and suffering brought about by the Holocaust in North Africa by following one man's journey as a Holocaust refugee. Graphic storytelling is a new trend in memorizing the Holocaust. There was the Anna Frank's diary, the graphic adaptation adapted by Ari Folman and illustrated by David Polinsky. Let me mention as a side note that Ari Folman also directed The Waltz with Bashir, a very strong graphic animated movie about the war in Lebanon. And just a few days on the news, I heard about a new book or movie by Michelle Kashka, Memories from Memories from My Father's House, or something like that. But not all these writings I mentioned are so somber. I also was happy to see a paper called A Moroccan Kabbalist in the White House, Understanding the Relationship between Jared Kushner and Moroccan Jewish mysticism. Looking at the news, you might have to write a new version of this book in about a year or so. I hope not, but who knows? And you may wish to consult with some Kabbalah experts in our Department of Jewish Thoughts, who also are experts in spells and witchcraft and so on. The third paper I want to mention, the third publication, Shootouts for the Nation, Football and Politics in Post-Colonial Moroccan-Algerian Relations, elaborating on the relationship between soccer and politics. You might have a very interesting relationship between soccer and politics in Israel as well. There are teams which are right-wing and teams which are left-wing and so on. And I wish to welcome Denis Shovit from the Open University. Thank you. In conclusion, I wish to thank Professor Jackie Feldman, the Esther and Sydney Raab Center he heads, the Distinguished Visitors Program administered by the university and our faculty, and all other parties who took part in setting up today's and tomorrow's events, and all the speakers who will participate in the panel today, wishing us all an exciting and thought-provoking panel. I'm passing the floor to Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be conducting the session as follows. We have 5 speakers, so I will introduce all right now. And each of them will speak for about 10 minutes on an aspect of Shoah and or Holocaust and Africa, or intersections of Holocaust and colonialism. And then we'll ask our distinguished guest, Professor Omar Booms, to respond. And following that, we'll have a second round of about 5 minutes each, where each person will address some question, a series of questions that was distributed to them on future directions or things that occupy their thinking and their research right now. So let me do this way. Rather than introduce a long list, I'll introduce each one, speak first, and then I'll give a short introduction for each. So our first speaker will be Orit Waknin-Yakutieli, who is a lecturer here in the Department of Middle East Studies at our university, the chair of the Chaim Herzog Center for Middle East Studies and Diplomacy, and the chair of the Ben Gurion University Fund for the Research of North African Jewry. Her research deals with the history of Moroccan Jewry and the historiography about them in Morocco and its diasporas, memory, cultural production, intergroup, and interreligion relationships. Right now, she's focusing on communities in the Atlas, the anti-Atlas, and the Saharan oases. She also investigates colonialism, Qaidalism, labor history, and the Vichy period in Morocco.
Thank you, Jackie. First, let me acknowledge our honored guest, my dear friend, Omar Boom, from whom I have learned so much on the subject we deal with today, from his work, as well as from our endless conversations about different topics concerning Moroccan history. I wish also to thank the organizer of the event, the Raab Center, and particularly Ronnie and Jackie, and to the members of this roundtable that continue or not our friends as well as colleagues, and each one of them is part in the researches I will describe shortly. So we were asked to present our scholarship on the subject of World War II, colonialism, and the Holocaust. So I'll go over very quickly and mention some research, and then I'll move on to an ongoing research, a researching process that I would like to hear the member of the panel, the reactions, suggestions, and so on. So in the last few years, I studied various aspects of life in the French protectorate in Morocco at the time of the Vichy regime, 1940 to 1942. I will briefly mention some of the previous studies and then focus on a research in progress about the politics of remembrance of the Holocaust. When the Vichy government came to power in France in July 1940, one of the first goals it set for itself was to purify French society from its pollutants, those elements that allegedly caused France's fall, particularly Jews, communists, and Freemasons. As we saw in Omar's presentation, the slogan of this Vichy government was the Famille, Travail, Patrie, instead of Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. So this was the mood. Sorry if it's echoes something. It's your freedom to think about some kind of parallels. Legislation to this end appeared almost immediately. The French regulations were transferred to Morocco, where the heads of the protectorate who pledged alliance to Vichy received instruction to purify their office from those belonging to the undesirable groups. This event became known as the purge, l'épuration. I chose to study the purge through an analysis of personal appeals and petitions written to the protectorate offices. On that basis, I examined their bearing on issues such as long-term marks on the oppressed groups and individuals, the impact on Jewish-Muslim relationships, the notion of Frenchness, and the future socio-political processes in Morocco, like the struggle for independence and decolonization. This research also enabled me to visualize the closeness between the colonial situation, especially colonial patriotism, and fascist conceptualizations, which reached a peak during the Vichy period in the political and economic realms. For example, the method or the strategy and ideology of a corporatist economy, which was a combination between communist economy and liberal economy, designed by the Nazis, and continued to be part of the historical narrative in France, Morocco, and Israel. Another research I did was related to the actions during World War II, both under and after Vichy, of two Moroccan figures from whom I studied for quite some time, Tahami El-Glawi, the Pasha of Marrakesh, during the entire colonial period, and his son, Mehdi, who was killed in action during the war while commanding a Moroccan unit in the Battle of Italy. In that project, I analyzed various documents and texts to shed light on socio-political processes in Morocco at the time and on aspects of Moroccan-French relationships, such as expression of several levels of colonial narratives. The research I want to present today in a somewhat broader way is my study on historians' involvement in legal struggle over reparations for Moroccan Jews who lived under the Vichy rule. This ongoing research since 2016 involves a situation in which historians, lawyers, law firms, and state courts work together and against each other to produce a legal historical interpretation that interacts with academic research and collective memory of the Holocaust period, and has a direct bearing on the welfare of many people today. The starting point for this research was a decision made a year and a half ago on August 26, 2021. On that date, the Israel Supreme Court gave its final rule concerning an appeal against a previous ruling of the District Court of Haifa over the question of the entitlement of Moroccan Jews who live under the Vichy regime to compensation under the 1957 Nazi Persecution Disability Law, חוק נכי רדיפות הנאצים תשי"ז. The decision of the Supreme Court was a rejection of the appeal. Specifically, Moroccan Jews are not entitled to these benefits. My research on this topic does not aim to judge whether this decision was right or wrong. Rather, I want to examine the situation which unfolded throughout this legal process. A few words of explanation are needed before I proceed. Holocaust survivors in Israel receive benefits mainly from two bodies: the International Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, ועדת התביעות, and the state of Israel via its authority of the right of Holocaust survivors, הרשות לזכויות ניצולי השואה. The compensations from Israel are regulated by several national laws from 1954, 57, and 2007. Some of them are conditioned upon German law due to Germany's involvement in some of the payments. Until 2011, all the compensation that were issued were granted to Holocaust survivors from Europe. However, in that year, the German government recognized some of the Jews who lived under the Vichy regime in French Morocco as entitled, on behalf of the aid fund of the Conference of Material Claims, to receive a one-time compensation of 2,500 euros, as well as additional rights such as full exemption from medication for their persecution during World War II. Following this precedent, the Israeli Ministry of Finance amended some of the existing laws, and in 2015 decided that expatriates from Morocco and Algeria who suffered restrictions in various areas of life under the Vichy regime were entitled to an annual benefit grant of 3,600 new Israeli shekels, and a full exemption from paying deductibles when purchasing prescriptions drugs. A year later, a law firm that represented Jews who lived in Morocco under Vichy reached the conclusion that there were legal and historical grounds for recognizing some of these people as eligible for monthly compensation from the state of Israel, according to the 1957 law. The firm applied to the Authority of the Rights of Holocaust Survivors, but after being rejected, went to a court appeal to oppose this decision. After being rejected, the firm appealed to the Supreme Court, and as I already described, received a final rejection. My interest in this process derives from the option it offers to discuss and better understand the dynamics between historical production, legal procedure, and superiority granted to legal facts in modern thinking over other senses. The main question posed to the historians and witnesses that lived in Morocco during the Vichy period were first, in which way and scale did the Vichy regulations in Morocco restrict or deny the freedom of Moroccan Jews? And second, how independent from Germany was the Vichy regime in general? And the other question referred to the deterioration of Muslim-Jews relationships according to the Vichy restrictions. Through this, I tried to learn the interface between law, history, memory, and hegemonic and non-hegemonic discourses. I also asked whether the involvement of many historians and lawyers in the case on both sides of the legal procedure affect the academic study of World War II in Morocco and shapes memory. Did their involvement result in accelerated research? Did it orient the study to certain new routes? What are the reciprocal dynamics between legal story and historiography? What is the emotional involvement in this process? And its potential to create narratives of Jewish sharing of faith and claim for justice for Mizrahiim in one of the most important sites of painful belonging, in the state of Israel, the Holocaust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orit. Our next speaker will be Professor Ruth Genio, who is an associate professor in the history department and chair of the department here at Ben Gurion. Her field of expertise is French colonialism in West Africa. She's authored 3 books, The French Army and Its African Soldiers, The Years of Decolonization, European Colonialism, and French Colonialism Unmasked, the Vichy Years in French West Africa. She's published numerous articles and book chapters on Vichy rule in French West Africa, African soldiers in the French army, French perceptions of African beliefs in witchcraft, and legal history in the French Empire. She has recently served as a consultant for a French Channel 5 documentary on Vichy and the colonies.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie and Ronnie, for inviting me to speak here. Also, very pleased to meet Professor Maboun in person, because we only met on Zoom, which is not a fair thing at all. I want to start by saying that actually, unlike my colleagues here, I'm not an expert on the Holocaust or Jewish studies, and it's actually quite strange because my own personal story is that my mother was hidden in a French convent during the war, and her story kind of accompanied my childhood. And when I went to university, I studied African studies, and I was certain I want to work on French colonialism. And when people ask me why, I actually said that I think it's because I'm interested in France in some way. even though I went to study about Africa, I wanted to to examine the encounter between the French and also it gives you lots of occasions to go to Paris, which I like very much. But I didn't want to touch this topic of the Holocaust in France. I took one course and it was quite difficult. And the professor at the end was during the main asked me, why won't you do some like PhD research on the Holocaust in France? And no, I can't. I mean, it's too personal. It's too painful. I cannot do it. And also because I do like France, I don't want to look into this aspect, although I did look at colonialism, so it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, what happened was that sometimes the archives play games on you, and you think that you don't want to touch Jewish history at all. And well, you go to I didn't go to research North Africa, which had a substantial Jewish population. I went to study French West Africa. I didn't think I would meet any Jewish person there. And I was in the archives working on my PhD thesis about the Vichy regime in French West Africa. And all of a sudden, I see this dossier, file, big file, called Les Victimes de Vichy. And I thought, okay, let's look at that. And I see that all these victims are actually Jews. And I was really surprised because I didn't know there were any Jews there. And I thought to myself, well, that doesn't really go into my PhD, right? So maybe I'll just ignore it. But the file kind of spoke to me and said, no, you can't ignore me. And I thought, well, probably no one who works on Jewish history will come to the archive in Dakar. So this is the only chance of these documents, this story to be told. Later, actually, now there are some very prominent African scholars who do work on this question of Jews, and then enlarge my own research, which was limited to one article. Was happily published in Hebrew, in French, and now thanks to Omar also in English version of it. So actually, finally, I found myself dealing with this subject, which I wanted to avoid. And what was really fascinating about this topic of this persecution of Jews in French West Africa is exactly that there was so little of them, so few of them. And you would think, well, there were actually 110 listed, okay, 110 out of millions of people. That's nothing. And you can say, well, why bother writing about this? It's so, such of people. It's not a big question, it's not a big issue, but actually the fact that there were so few, and yet there was this persecution going on for just 110 people, it kind of raised questions about this characteristic of the Vichy regime, the obsession of this regime, and why this happened in a region that was so far away from France. And it's not today, the communication was really bad. You sent it some letter, it arrived like a few months later. It wasn't something that they could really control. So I don't have much time, and I know that probably not many of you know anything about this. Probably you know more about North Africa. So I'll just try to give you some points and explain the main conclusions of this research. So here you can see Pétain's announcement of the condition of the armistice to the French on 25th of June 1940, and you can see I marked it in red. He repeats the words "our colonies" or "the colonies" 3 times in this short segment, and this is not coincidence. Pétain actually presented the fact that the French could keep their colonies. The reason for that was that the Germans didn't want to bother about them, but still it presented it as a great achievement and as something that gives France still territory, manpower, and especially a kind of diplomatic playing card for the future, which they can, they thought that the war was going to be over quite soon. The British going to sign some kind of armistice themselves, and then it will all be over, and France will have to negotiate its place in this new horrible that will be the result of this. it used a lot of the colonies a lot in its propaganda. For example, you can see this game on like the play on the tricolor, the three colors of defense. So it's like kind of not very PC. The three colors of the French Empire. You can see someone from Indochina, someone from Sub-Saharan Africa, and someone from North Africa. And there's this one, Omar just mentioned the Trans-Saharan train. And so this is one of the supposedly achievements, although it wasn't an achievement because they didn't actually succeed in doing this. This train that was supposed to go from North Africa to West Africa, and La France continue, which means like, French continues, and thanks to, and you also can see there the Jenne Mosque, the mosque in Mali, today's Mali, in the French Sudan. So this is kind of a way to say we are still strong, we can do stuff, even though that we were defeated by Germany. Okay, so I'm not going to get into all this because that will take me too much time. But just in general, French West Africa is a federation of 8 colonies. Its capital is in Dakar, which is today the capital of Senegal. Back then, it was just the capital of the federation. And there's also, Omar mentioned the Tiraya Senegalais. There were a lot around September 1939 and June, between September 1939 until the armistice, around 100,000 Africans were mobilized. And Dakar is considered to be a strategic port. And then the colonies, French West Africa and Equatorial French Africa, there's a question of what to do. They're far away from France, and they have to decide, are they going to support Pétain, which is actually the logical thing to do because the Vichy government is the legitimate government of France, or they should follow this general there that nobody actually knew very well the goal and support his goal. And the general governor of Equatorial French Africa, this guy Felix Eboué, always mentioned that there's a okay, sorry, I'll go back to the Jews. Sorry, if you want to read, you can ask me questions about that. Okay, so we have 110 Jews, and you can see here their nationalities. I'm just going to focus on one case to show what kind of absurdity the French legislation in West Africa reached, which is the case of a Jewish lawyer. A Jewish lawyer, in France, the law said that Jews cannot be more than 2% of in the legal professions. In French West Africa in 1941, there were 30 lawyers in the entire federation because people didn't need lawyers. There was this legal system didn't use lawyers. So there were only 30 lawyers, and there was one Jew. That means, with calculations, one is more than 2%, right? And then the law, according to the law, had to be fired. And Poisson, the general governor, is kind of embarrassed by it. And he writes a letter, but he doesn't think about, okay, let's just forget about him. It's there in Guinea, no one knows, no one will bother with it, no one will in France will even know. No, he writes a letter to the Vichy government and asks, listen, it's kind of ridiculous because there are only 30 lawyers and just, one is more than 2%. It makes it, it kind of makes it a bit ridiculous. Let's just forget it. And they say, no, a law is a law, have to obey the law. It doesn't matter how many Jews there are. And this guy is fired. So I'm just going to say that this case is one of the several cases that I found, but it's kind of show you how, first of all, how it was important for the governor general to follow the law, and if he doesn't want to follow the law, ask for permission not to follow the law. So it's kind of this legalistic attitude of the French, even if it was not, he didn't want to fire this guy. And on the other hand, also this kind of insistence of keeping these anti-Jewish laws even in the remotest parts of the empire, even where there are like just a few dozens of Jews. So finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Professor Denis Charby, who is a professor of political science at the Open University of Israel and head of the Center for the Study of Relations between Jews, Christians, and Muslims at the Open University. As a specialist of political ideas and French intellectuals, part of his research is devoted to North African Jewish thought, especially André Chouraqui and Albert Memmi. He edited in French a conversation between Chouraqui and Léon Ashkenazi, À l'heure d'Israël, and in Hebrew, Memmi's most famous essay, The Colonized and the Colonizer, published by Carmel Press in Jerusalem.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for this kind invitation. As I am the sole scholar that is not from the BGU, but from the Open University. So thank you. Thank you for your help. I need to explain to the audience that my area of research is history of ideas, focused on 20th century French intellectuals. Most of them were born in North Africa. As such, I wrote a lot in Hebrew, in French, in English about some prominent figures of different generations, like Albert Camus and André Chouraqui, that both were born in Algeria, and later Jacques Derrida, and also the historian Benjamin Stora, that were born at the eve of the Second War or immediately after, and also Albert Memmi from Tunisia. I generally took them separately, as I thought they deserve a unique treatment. Connected to the genuine development of a new trend of historiography, relying on Holocaust and North Africa studies, I conceived the idea of writing a piece of work about one event that had an impact on their life and on their thought. The aim is to write about Décret Crémieux abrogation that was abrogated in 1940 and reinstalled in 1943, and to add to this trio, Camus, Chouraqui, and Derrida, another figure that was part of the Algerian side, I mean, the national Algerian leader at that time, Ferhat Abbas. How did an event like the Décret Crémieux affect the life? How did it shape the opinion and maybe the worldview? How many references we may find in the work, in the diaries? I thought that we must use a new approach that aims to propose what I call the polyphony of voices, as an event may raise the same discourse, the same opposition, but let a deployment of many strategies. Derrida is in the article a crucial figure in this picture because it affected him as he was 10 years old. Camus and Chouraqui were young adults, and Ferhat Abbas was a elder, 41 years old. But let's go back to the decree, its history, and its the decision by Vichy authorities. My hypothesis is that the abrogation of Décret Crémieux was a turning point for all of them, the four, and had an impact, as I told, in their personal and public destiny. I will have no time to explain about each of them, but I will start at least one or two. I will start by Jacques Derrida, because, as you know, it's a philosopher and he doesn't deal with his personal biography until the last period of this life. And in two books, he told us about what he suffered when he was excluded from public school. The Jewish teachers created an alternative and opened a school for these young Jews. I think that this event, that was a trauma of him, even if it was aware that it's not the same like a Jewish child in France or in Poland, but it transformed him into the philosopher of hospitality, supporting migrants without papers and disabled persons. His work on borders, on traces, on displacement, I think must be connected to this experience. The second case that I studied is one of Albert Camus. Albert Camus lived at that time in Algeria, and when he heard about the Decret Crémieux abrogation, he decided to move to Oran to teach French literature in a Jewish school, and he did it during 1 year. And Oran, as you know, probably know, is the town in which the plague, one of the most famous novel, is. And then he moved to the Chambon-sur-Lignon, to a Protestant village for health reasons. And then he met André Chouraki. André Chouraki that was born in Algeria, but he was in France during the war. And they met together at the same place. And André Chouraki helped to rescue Jewish children from the Nazis when they moved to the south of France after 42. And my last figure is Ferhat Abbas. Ferhat Abbas, as you know, probably is one of the famous, leader of the national Algerian movement during the 40s and the 50s. It was pushed after the rebellion, after the war in 1954. But he started his political way as supporting assimilation in the French, so asking from equality. And it is only after the removal of the Decret Crémieux that he decided to, as it's not connected to Muslim, but he understood that it means that what France is ready to give, France can at any moment take again. And so he moved from assimilationist or integrationist position and moved to a position based on independence and the end of French presence in Algeria. And therefore, I will finish now to say that sometimes it's important to take one event, and I think that it would be a good idea for for works and seminars as you are students at the first degree or the second one, and to take one event and to see how it reflects in therefore to understand that sometimes people were not born like a great politician or a great author, but circumstances create the condition in order to transform them into big figures like they were. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis. Our next speaker will be Aviad Moreno, who is a faculty member at the Ben Gurion Research Institute and at our university. He's co-editor of The Long History of Mizrahim, published by Ben Gurion University Press 2021, and the author of Europe from Morocco, The Minutes of Tangier's Jewish Community Council, and of the book Entwined Homelands, Empowered Diasporas, Hispanic Moroccan Jews and Their Globalizing Community, forthcoming from Indiana Press. Professor Moreno serves on the board of the National Academy of Ladino, the Content Committee of the ANU Museum of the Jewish People, and is a co-founder of the Center for Research on Northern Moroccan Jewry in Morocco, and recently has been nominated as an international member of the Spanish Royal Academy. Professor Moreno.
Thank you, Dr. Nolan. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Feldman. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be here and speak about the introduction of Africa and Holocaust studies. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank you, the organizer. Exciting event, really important and interesting. And I'm also really to see Omar Boum here and earlier about his work. Fascinating and interesting. And also to hear your comments and insights, my co-panelists. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Today I will be speaking. Okay. So Africa is not a homogeneous continent, as we can imagine, as we know, and so is colonialism and experiences of the Second World War in Africa. And until now, I think we heard about the major colonial power, about France. I'd like to focus on a minor power in North Africa, but one that was actually very, very interesting. It dominated a very, very strategic point in North Africa. I'm talking about Spanish colonialism, okay, which we tend not to hear a lot about when we speak about colonialism in North Africa. Basically governed the Mediterranean northern belt of this section, which was international. I'll talk about it very briefly. So my point is that this very specific colonial project has a twist to what we understand about Jewish, Muslim or Christian relations. So as a country, first of all, with Islamic and Jewish legacies or histories, Al-Andalus, Sepharad, as we all know, Spain's modern colonial campaign in Africa was very different from that of France and Britain, and also from Italy's. On the one hand, first of all, it began, you can describe it in many ways as a proto-colonial, was kind of colonialism. It began very early, shaped by the Reconquista, by the reconquer of Iberian Peninsula between the 8th century and the 15th century, when aspiration to expand into Africa actually came in response to the Islamic context, and also it manifested in, as we all know, in the expulsion of Sepharad, but also in the fall of the That's one point. It was also shaped by the myth of the convivencia, the myth of coexistence between Muslims, Jews, and Christians in medieval Spain, which also traveled into Morocco, and I'll talk about it very briefly later. But the fact that Sephardi Jews in Morocco obtained and developed the Judeo-Spanish language, which was brought as former residents of the Iberian Peninsula and developed well into the 20th century, actually generating an unprecedented case in colonial history when they spoke a very similar language to the colonized, to the population they encountered. And in this context, Spain began to justify its colonial expansion by describing it partly as a re-encounter, or basically a re-encounter between what they began to imagine and write about as stateless Spaniards, Sephardi Jews without a state, and the Spaniards, the colonizers. Muslims has a different story. I'm not going to refer to it now, address it now, it's more complex. Now, a second characteristic of Spanish colonialism in Africa in the 20th century was its its weak and fragile position as a colonial power, as I mentioned, because it lost its global empire in the Americas in the 19th century and also in the Pacific. And actually, when it entered the Second World War, it was actually after a devastating civil war in Spain, which actually brought it into. So Spain's strategy, and that's quite important to understand, was particularly dynamic and opportunistic in a way, because it traveled from, now I'm talking about Franco, the fascist, who based his support during the Civil War on Hitler. Hitler supported him, also Mussolini. And during the war, when the war started, he went from neutrality, he did not want to collaborate, to non-belligerency. And after the fall of France, after France was conquered by Nazi forces in 1940, he actually began sending some, forces, the Blue Division, to help Peter to assist him on the Eastern Front, which is a very interesting, turn of, policies, or very dynamic policy here, interesting, so to speak. Now, combining these two characteristics of Spanish colonialism, its nostalgia towards Farad and also its weak position, we can actually start to appreciate its unusual perspective or approach toward Jews during the Second World War. So on the one hand, there was a deeply rooted anti-Semitism in Spain. We should, acknowledge that, and it actually fueled Franco's rhetoric against Jews, as you know, not just Franco's, any nationalist supporters actually railed against the so-called Jewish Bolshevik, Masonic conspiracy to rule the world. They blamed European Jews also for deteriorating Spain into a civil war. But on the other hand, Spanish colonialism, even in Franco's years, actually increased, intensified in that time. And the Holocaust was dominated by a long-lasting notion that Sephardi Jews are actually, they're constituting as stateless Spaniards, and that eventually led to conceptual separation in Franco's mind and in the overall, Spanish right, between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, and also between mainland Spain, Spain as a country, and its colonial project, colonial territory, which became very essential for, maintaining the Spain's strict immigration policy specifically after 1940, made it very difficult for Jewish refugees to enter the country. I think we heard about it in almost conversation in a way. And then there was a very interesting approach because Spain also provided help to several Sephardi Jews by granting them passports. They became Spaniards, and that actually what saved them. Now, that wasn't Franco's policy or merit, but it happened under his reign, through his foreign office. He supported it. It wasn't very official, but it passed. Now, another very important complexity that I want to address here is accusing Jews in Spain and the conquest regime of dominating the global economy. Franco still actually relied very heavily on the Jews in northern Morocco. He imposed taxes on them, requests for donations, and actually they did donate. There was this very famous Hassan family with a very famous bank in Morocco, really supported Franco's campaign and actually helped him prevail during much of the civil war. So Franco's opportunistic approach was also manifested in Spain's attitude toward refugees coming from Poland and Hungary during the war to Tangier. And to understand this, if I have time, I'd like to.
Thank you,
So I'd like to explain, touch upon the geopolitical structure in northern Morocco. Because it was a very strategic location on the stairs of Gibraltar, all those ships passing to the Suez Canal, Tangier had a unique status as an international zone from December 1924 to 1956, and that meant that they had like a committee made up of representatives from various countries. And in June 1940, after the fall of Nazi France, Franco took advantage of the chaos and decided to annex Tangier to the protectorate. And now many Republicans, people who fled, from the territory, now fled from Tangier. Also left-wing groups fled about this. But this annexation actually brought new people into the city. It brought Nazi agents, German intelligence agents, who granted permission to operate more freely in the city. And Franco actually gave them the Menduvia, the building of the international zone, and they raised the Nazi flag over this building. So imagine you have Jewish refugees coming into the city, and they are encountering a Nazi, flag on a major building, administration building in the city. And obviously the Nazis were not allowed to walk around with a uniform, but they were still there, very present, people saw them. So in Franco's mind, that's my main point, if I have time, I'll develop it. Jewish refugees in the city actually helped him maintain a very complex narrative that he was the most capable colonial power to maintain neutrality, to maintain peace, to maintain the international status in the city, which was also very cynical, but it helped him in a way. And he did hold his reign in Tangier for a while. And that brings another question about the Jewish community's perspective on this, which is very interesting as well, because there were Sephardic Jews. They shared many cultural affinities with Spain in a way. They had established good relations with the former regime republics, but also with the monarchists, and it was a very, very let's say interesting encounter that did touch upon the self-pride of Sephardic Jews in a way. And it did not change all the way through when Franco entered the city. Spaniard was still there. It was still Spanish, which was very dominant. And actually, because of many refugees entered the country, it increased the dominance of Spanish culture and presence. And those Jews identified with that culture. So as long as, you know, Franco did not translate any of his fascist aspiration into concrete anti-Jewish violence in Tangier or in the Protectorate, you saw an elite of Jews, the leadership of the communities, actually collaborated with him and collected money. And even if they did it out of fear, they still participated in his, you know, in his plans to develop his colonial regime.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Dr. Roni Mikel-Arieli, the cultural historian interested in the intersections between Holocaust memory, contemporary Jewish history, and African studies. She's postdoctoral fellow at the Rab Center for Holocaust Studies here, she's working on digital Holocaust memory in museums. And I'd like a special thanks and applause for Roni, without whom this conference would not have been.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that everything is working, but thank you. I'm sorry.
She's also the academic director of the Oral History Division at the Institute of Contemporary Jewry at Hebrew University, and is a teaching fellow, and we see here many of her students here, at Ben Gurion, also at the Open University and Hebrew University, where she teaches a variety of courses on Africa and the Holocaust, selected issues in Holocaust, in history and memory, modern Jewish history, and the history of slavery. And I'm very proud to say that over the next 3 years, we'll be working together on a project together with the University of Tübingen on Holocaust representations in a digital age. And her first authored book was published last year by decolonization, entitled Remembering the Holocaust in a Racial State, Holocaust Memory in South Africa, From Apartheid to Democracy.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank my captured audience here for coming. Thank you so much. So I will take you to a different location. We will focus on South Africa, and we will also focus on the aftermath of the Holocaust. And I chose to speak about an anti-apartheid activist, actually an Indian Muslim anti-apartheid activist, Ahmed Muhammad Kathrada, who was very much inspired by some events related to the Holocaust and some memorial sites, connected to the Holocaust, and actually drove inspiration from it to his struggle. So I hope that it will be interesting. On the morning of October 15, 1989, Ahmed Muhammad Kathrada was released from Portsmouth Maximum Security Prison near Cape Town. A South African Indian veteran of the anti-apartheid struggle, prison trialist, and long-serving political prisoner, Kathrada had spent 26 years and 3 months in prison, 18 years of which were on Robben Island, the notorious prison of the Black prisoners of apartheid. Leaving his prison cell, Kathrada carried with him some cardboard boxes containing his most prized belongings. It included 900 cardboard copies of letters he had written and an equivalent number of letters that he had received. And there were also 7 secret notebooks in which Kathrada had secretly recorded inspiring passages he had encountered over the years. In his 3rd notebook, Kathrada recorded 13 entries from the diary of Anne Frank, which was actually smuggled onto Robben Island in the late 60s. On November 2014, I had the privilege of visiting the University of Western Cape, Robben Island Maibuye archive, and located Kathrada's prison notebooks. However, it soon became clear to me that Kathrada's interest in the Holocaust did not start with reading the diary in prison. In his memoirs written in 2004, he dedicated a chapter to a formative visit he made to the Auschwitz death camp and to the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland in 1951. After hours, I actually realized that I have to meet him and to learn firsthand of his experiences. And 2 months before my third visit to South Africa in 2016, I came across a Facebook post by the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center about an event that they organized marking Refugee Day. And the invited key speaker was Ahmed Kathrada. And I saw the opportunity and asked the director of the center, Tali Nates, to try and put me in touch with him. And I was very, very, very lucky to meet him on 11 August 2016 and in his apartment in Johannesburg. And he received me with open arms and was very keen to share his fascinating and inspiring life story with me. And I'm saying very, very lucky because Kathrada died 6 months later on 28 March 2017 at the age of 87. And a month after his passing, the Kathrada Foundation gave me a free access to his personal archive, where I located transcripts of his political speeches from the 50s. We'll get there. So reading together Kathrada's statements, speeches, and prison notebooks in conjunction with his own memoirs and personal documents and the interview that I have conducted with him, I was now able to address several questions. What made it possible for Kathrada to address Jewish suffering? What stands behind such invocations of memory and meaning, and how can we see Kathrada negotiating between different forms of commemoration and memorialization? And to answer these questions, I had to chart Kathrada's life narrative, as well as the course of local and global events that led to his negotiation. And of course, we don't have time to do all of that, but I'll try to give you a taste. So Kathrada was born on 21st August 1929 in Schwetzerrenach, a small Afrikaner-dominated rural town about 240 miles from Johannesburg, to a religious Muslim family of an Indian descent. And several scholars have already argued that the Indians are the Jews of Africa. And indeed, stereotypes of the Indian merchant as dishonest, crafty, and exploitive were prevalent in South African society from the very inception of Indian settlement in the country. While anti-Indian legislation had been imposed at regular intervals since the late 19th century, the rise of Afrikaner right-wing and pro-Nazi movements in the 30s and 40s provoked violent anti-Indian demonstrations, of course, along with anti-Jewish demonstrations as well. Local laws of segregation enforced separate schools in South Africa for separate races. Therefore, while in Schwetzerrenach, they had schools for Black South Africans and school for whites, they didn't have a school for Indians. And Kathrada had to actually move to Johannesburg at the age of 8. Oops. I still have time. So, and in Johannesburg, he immigrated when he was 8, alone. Okay, he lived with his aunt, without his parents, and this was where he actually was introduced to politics upon joining the non-racial youth club, and he actually joined the Youth Communist League. And in the interview, he actually stated that it was in the Communist Party meetings that he acquired deeper knowledge about Nazi Germany and the ongoing tragedy of European Jewry. Kathrada testified that the Communist Party's anti-fascist message had a great impact on him, especially in light of the right-wing Afrikaner support for Nazism at the time. But he specifically mentions his visit to Europe in 1951 as reinforcing his anti-fascist tendencies. So on 14 June 1951, very, very early, Katwada left South Africa and traveled to Hungary, where he was supposed to work at the World Federation of Democratic Youth as the head of the African desk. And while in Europe, he of course was exposed to the destruction left by World War II. And he was invited to participate in the Warsaw meeting of the International Union of Students, held in September 1951, and he had 2 weeks to actually tour the country. And in this period, he chose to visit the Warsaw Ghetto and Auschwitz. And one word about Auschwitz. In 1947, the Polish government declared Auschwitz-Birkenau a memorial site at which Poles and citizens of other nationalities fought and died a martyr's death. And the International Auschwitz Committee, which was comprised of survivors and relatives of the victims, was dominated by veterans of the largely communist Auschwitz underground. And this committee decided to turn over the barracks in the original war camp area to 20 countries for use as national pavilions. And one was the Jewish pavilions, which was usually locked and was only open by request. So it's not the Auschwitz that we know from now. And of course, as the Jewish killing was forced into the background, the extent of Polish suffering, as well as the role of the heroic liberating Red Army, was foregrounded. So Katwada, nevertheless, writes about Auschwitz. I could never obliterate the sight of the trench in which dogs mauled and savaged people to death, the gas chambers and incinerators, the lampshade made of human skin, the pillows stuffed with human hair. And he found the camp to be a poignant reminder to mankind of the evils of racism, and was overcome with emotions as he walked on, and he said, on fragments of human bones littering the street near the incinerators. And Katwada believed that the Jewish genocide constituted an important lesson for humanity and bore particular relevance for his own country. Thus, he carefully collected several of those human bones, and he takes it with him to South Africa and uses this bottle full of bones as a material display in his political speeches during the 50s. And as a stark reminder of racism's consequences. And I'll finish just by giving you one example of a political speech that he made using this bottle of bones. On a winter morning in September 1952, a few months after he came back to South Africa for the struggle, and actually he mentioned in the interview that it was his visit to Auschwitz that made him go back to struggle against apartheid. And he stood at a podium in Johannesburg talking to ANC youth, the African Congress, National Congress youth, and he stated, people are fighting for freedom in the whole world. I was in Europe a few months ago, and there saw a number of human bones laying about the country, bones of Jews that Hitler killed because he accused them of being communists. They were not communists. Malan is now following the example of Hitler by arresting our leaders. And we can see from this speech, and I'll end here, that was delivered actually few months after Katwada returned from Europe. It provides an accurate indication of his perception of the Holocaust. On the one hand, he specifically refers to the Jews as Hitler's victims, and simultaneously, he, in noting that Hitler accused the Jews of being communist, he echoes actually the Soviet narrative of the Holocaust. As other addresses made by Katwada demonstrate, this position enabled Katwada to draw parallels between Hitler and Malan, who was the architect of apartheid and the first prime minister of apartheid, and the parallel is of invoking the struggle against communism in order to suppress oppression. So by comparing between the Nazi Enabling Act of March 1933, which allowed the Nazis to effectively determine who was an opponent, and the apartheid suppression of communism from 1950, Kathrada points to the starking similarities between the two regions. Thank you.
אני יודע שלחלק מכם, כן, יש שיעורים אחרים, אבל אני מבקש, כן, יש כמה דקות של תגובה של האורח הכבוד, פרופסור בום, ולאחר מכן, אם תצטרכו, צריכים להגיע לקורס אחר, אז בבקשה. אם לא, אתם מוזמנים להישאר לכל היתר, אבל בקשה שלי, כן, יהיו 5 אנשים שתבואו כל אחד 5 דקות, אם אתם נשארים, תעזבו בין הדוברים ולא באמצע הדיבור. I'd like to then thank you very much to all our speakers, and I'd now like to invite Professor Boom to please to react. Professor Boom, I won't give the whole introduction of Professor Boom as a scholar of North Africa, of Jewish-Muslim relations of North Africa during the Shoah. He's published many things, but I recommend very highly this book, a graphic novel called Undesirables, A Holocaust Journey to North Africa. It's not in our library, I think, yet, but I'll see to it that there will be several copies. And was ordered?
Ordered.
Okay, so we'll see to it that there are copies available, and I recommend that you look at it and see how a graphic novel can be used as a tool for both historical awareness and moral sensitivity. So thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Jackie. It's a great honor to be here. Thanks, Ronnie, for the invitation. I think the topic of this workshop is really important, especially in the last, I would say, 20 years, and especially I would say in the last 10 years, given the amount of scholarship and writings and research that has been done about the connections between fascist, Nazi, and Italian, as well as German and Spanish policies in the continent. So from these 5 presentations that we've heard about the fascist policies in East Africa, in North Africa. There are also, in West Africa, in North Africa, in South Africa, and even in some areas in Sub-Saharan Africa. The other African scholars have also been working on the East African part of the continent. So all of these things, I think, highlight the importance of dealing and connecting the policies that were designed in the European context, in the metropole, in Berlin, in Paris, in Madrid, and their implications on what African population, both Jewish and Muslim, and from other ethnicities. So I'm going to talk about 2 points that are raised in these 5 presentations. But before I do that, I want to start with a personal vignette. In 2006, I would rather say in 2007, I had a fellowship at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where I was thinking about looking at anti-Semitic policies in Algeria right after the Premier Decree. And which the Premier Decree really generated a lot of anti-Jewish feelings in Algeria among the colon, among the settlers, but also among the native population. So I want to see how these anti-Semitic policies that were linked in some way to French settlers in Algeria, but also to the army, what kind of implications they had on the local Jewish population of Algeria that's just being granted citizenship, French citizenship. And I looked at the archive. So this is important for us to think about who owns memory and how do you write about memory, which is something that was reflected in all these talks. So you have to start somewhere with an archive. You can't write a memory with nothing. You know most of you here probably, and you've had a bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah. And when you stand there, you always think to the past. You have something, you read the text. There is a document that you read and they always connect it to a history. And I think to write about this, there are archives, as you know, there are archives all over the world. In your family, probably whether you're from a North African background or from an Iraqi background or from Moroccan background or from Polish background, somewhere in a box or somewhere in a storage in your home, there is a document that probably connects you to a family or a family history. And who gets to know, who gets to remember the Holocaust? Mostly Ashkenazi Jews at some point for a long time. And I think that's also highlights the moral and responsibility of not only Ashkenazi Jews, but also Sephardic Jews, Muslims. I think I can be part of that debate as a Muslim. I think I own Judaism just like a Moroccan Jew. Let's sit in close to me here owns Moroccan Judaism. I have a responsibility to write about it, to think about it, to think about the impact of the Vichy government on Moroccan Jews and on Moroccan Muslims. So I think the archives allow us to think at many levels, the polyphonic thing. I think polyphony, allows us to think about, there are all kinds of voices out there. And when you put these together, everybody has some perspective. It's just like when you're doing a film and you look at the lens, the way you move the camera, the way you can see different things from different angles. You're always seeing the core and the gist of the event, but you're looking at it from a different perspective. And I think that's why having now, if you go back to having scholars now thinking about what Sephardic, what Moroccan rabbis were thinking about the Holocaust, I think it's a very interesting perspective. And I think we're learning so much from it. We're learning so much from the poems and from the stories, from the narratives that being drafted and sung during the period of the war. And it's telling a different perspective about what it means to be a Jew in other parts of the world that were outside of Germany or France. Then the second point I want to talk about, in addition to the archive, is about memory and post-memory. And it's great to see here all. I think as a younger generations, you guys were old enough to you have a different way of thinking about the world, of seeing it from your own present moment, from your own background. But I think we have and that's why we're in the conversation. That's why for me the graphic part, everyone has a phone here, and then the way we think about visuals, we think about images, is also something I think that we have to think about how we transmit memory. How it's really interesting to see Holocaust survivors and generations of or kids of Holocaust survivors, how they're thinking about sometimes even TikTok, and sometimes thinking about Facebook and Twitter, and as a way to maintain that memory. That I think in many ways it's different from the way Yad Vashem or the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum or other Holocaust Memorial Museum to us, the world are thinking about it. So I think that the idea of how you connect the memory of the war and the memory of the Holocaust to how other generations, the post-memory, think about it, is also, I think, something that's important to reflect on it as historians, but also as anthropologists of the as anthropologists. So my conclusion has to do with that was mentioned in Ori's presentation, was about the politics of memory. And I think the politics of the memory can take us into two directions. They can help us build a politics of hope, where we take these memories and we do something positive about them. We interact, we build a better world, but they also can create frictions and debate and struggles between internal communities sometimes, and sometimes between different communities. And I think that's the channels that's the challenge that state policies have to think about, even whether they take what the historians, what the universities suggest to them with good faith or not. That's for the voters to decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Boom, and I invite all of you tomorrow. We're still here, but those of you who have to go to class, tomorrow we'll be here with a program with Professor Boom starting at 11 a.m. till 2:30, I think. And you're all welcome to come, same room, same place.
I'll just say, I know, I'll explain that some of the students have class, so that's why they're leaving, so, and it's fine. Whoever can and wants are welcome to stay. We didn't finish the session, so it's, but thank you for coming. Mhm.
Okay.
I think we can stop, we can continue.
Okay. We'll now continue, we'll have a short reflection on each of our participants on some aspect of their research or concern that they're working on or involved with at present. Maureen, would you like to begin? Would you want to come up?
So it's a natural continuation of Omar's conclusion in his last word now. And when we got the subject, of course, the topic of memory and memorialization was the topic I want to present, to discuss in a very brief way. So there are few concerns with the studying of the Holocaust and the term Holocaust in North Africa. So in my study, few parallel phenomena occurring during the last 2 decades, as Omar already mentioned, are evident, and I want to mention some of it. And we met in this conference, the first conference in the Holocaust Museum, Washington, in 2008, after Omar was there for a year, and he organized the first conference. But since then, we could see a huge growth in the study of the Holocaust, in the study of World War II in the periphery of the world. And as an historiographer, I want so now I will refer to a few questions about the historiography on the Holocaust in North Africa and Israel, but I will mention also the changes in the historiography both in Morocco and in the US, and they are all connected, which specific characterization of each country or each place. But I can say in large that we saw a process where from a very, I will call it epistemological islands, where the Shoah was studied, especially in the US, in France, in Europe, and in Israel, but most of them were national ones, or it was the national narrative. And what we can see in the last 2 decades is that we are ready to discuss genocide, not just the Shoah, genocide wars in a larger context and not just the national one, or not to treat wars and disasters as a justification for national claim. And I think this turning point allowed us to look at different spaces and also a different subject. So this is one observation on the historiography on the Holocaust. So when we go to the Israeli case, so we all know that the Shoah was a thing that considered to be an Ashkenazi subject. Yes, as Israeli, it was an Israeli subject, but it was Ashkenazi and a national Israeli subject. And the turn was that in the last 2 decades, there was a turn both first in Israel and then in the US, and I call it the Mizrahi turn, when people started to connect between their Mizrahiness or Mizrahi studies, if there's a thing like this. There isn't. We just started it in our university, and it was painful, believe me. It was rejected by the most of the people in our faculty, and thanks to our dean, this program is on. We have 12 MA students studying Mizrahi studies, but this turning point allowed us to talk about the suffering of, and that was the problem of this narrative, the suffering of the Mizrahi. So in order to become part of the Israeli society, to belong to Israeli society, and belonging was based on suffering. So had to prove that they suffered as well. And this had an awful impact on the way we studied the war in North Africa and the way we studied in general Jews in Muslim countries, because it was always on the background of the Holocaust. And this kind of a unified nationalist basis for legitimized actions or existence. And when I started to study the compensation issue, I could see how the question of compensation entered the court. And I'm sorry, but I have to mention our current event with this political revolution, because when I started to look at the documentation of the court and the process, when they rejected the Moroccan demands for compensation or to be acknowledged as Holocaust survivors, it's not my opinion. In apparently, I would say that I oppose the use of Shoah in the context of Morocco, but this is another issue. So, but I still think that wars are really, and Omar said it before, wars are really, really important, and we have to take into consideration the ways that people suffered, lost, and didn't recover for the experience of the war. But in the process, when the Supreme Court reached a decision to reject the Moroccan claim for compensation, there were, that the second to the president of the Supreme Court is presenting the decision, and then the other have to agree. Say, I agree. This is the process. And after the rejection was presented to the judges, all of them said, I agree, and that's it. And then I arrived to another judge, and he wrote 5 pages. He said, okay, I agree to the decision, but with a great pain. And he explained why it is wrong, but still the law. The decision is wrong.
The name of the judge.
I will look for it. But he was the only Mizrahi.
Okay, Liron.
Liron. He was the עכשיו, לירון. כן, לירון. So he was the only Mizrahi that at least acknowledged the experience of the Moroccans. And if he didn't feel comfortable with this decision. So when we come to today, and of course you can imagine that I'm against this governmental revolution, so it's called reform. So but also I'm against the previous order, whether it is in the memory of the Holocaust, in the memory of the wars, in the way the academia was shaped, and in the Supreme Court. So we can see how we have to, when we talk about dynamics between politics and history, we tend to say, especially not in humanities, no, we should leave politics aside. But once we leave politics aside, which is part and parcel of our work, our writing, and what is happening around us, we do, we are not good historians, and we allow injustices around us. So I try to show how the memory of the Shoah can come up to these days, and how it is shaped by different political context. And the same case is true to Morocco and the US and the globalized knowledge of the Holocaust. Thank you.
I want to say something that kind of jumped to my mind after hearing Aviad and also after hearing you mentioned Tangier and the Nazi flag that was up there, and when I started with my mother, so it's really fair. My father was left Poland in April 1940, and he actually went to Trieste by train, and then from Trieste he wanted to come here, but he didn't get a certificate, so he was told that he can go to the Jews can go to Tangier like as refugees, and only if they show they don't have to pay anything, but they have to show that they have $50. And they had $50, so they went on this boat to Tangier, and they spent 4 years in Tangier. After that, they went to Lisbon, and from Lisbon they took a boat, like a Portuguese boat, through all the colonies in Africa. So they went once in Angola, and one was in Mozambique, and then we came to El Arish, and from there to Haifa. So that was the like journey from Poland in 1940. And why I mentioned it in connection with what you said now is about these documents of the family and kind of the question of remembrance and the archive. And I had a very strange experience once when I went to Yad Ben Zvi, and there was this conference there about the Holocaust in North Africa. And there was this scholar, lady from France, I think she was, and she was talking about Tangier. And I was listening, and all of a sudden she mentions my father's brother-in-law, the husband of his sister. She mentioned him by name. So I was really excited. I've never heard anyone from my family in an academic lecture. And so I came to her after that, and she said, yeah, she saw his name in the archives, and she really would like to put with my father and my uncle. And she was very excited, and she sent me the paper after that. And I was really thrilled by it. So I sent the paper to this guy's son, my cousin, who lives in France. And his response amazed me. He was so outraged. He said, what is she talking about? It wasn't like this at all. It's nonsense what she said. She said something about having like a conflict between the local population, the local Jewish population, and the Polish population. It never happened. And what really, I think, made him mad that she said some not very nice things about his father. It was like kind of a, what's it, like a scam. I don't want to say, like, kind of, people, someone who's just managing everything. And then I came to my father, and I told him, can you read it and tell me, because I always counted on my father to be very, real about things. And he read it and said, listen, I don't remember it like this. I know about my brother-in-law, yeah, sure, he was like that. I'm not surprised. but the part about these conflicts, I don't remember. But this woman, she said in the archives, she's a serious historian. How can you say she's wrong? And I think it was like a very kind of different approach, because even though he didn't remember it like that, he kind of respected the archives and her research and her scholars, like being a scholar, a serious scholar. And it made me think after that, and in relation to what we're talking about, what is our role as historians? We write history from the archives, but of course, and then these people who's been living there, the greatest nightmare of someone who's, it's not now it's better, because I mean these people are getting older and older, but when you have like this kind of pre-listeners in your class, which are like in the World War II, it's horrible, because no, you are wrong. I was there. It was not like this. And that's something that reminded me of this. So just wondering what to think about it, this kind of conflict.
And she sent me to find the house, and Ruti sent me a mission to find the father house.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Please don't take it as a. So, I am really fascinated by your story. It's not only on the French side, but also on the Tangier side. I think you're right. A lot of Polish, as Aviad would know from his research, the Tangier story hasn't been told yet. We haven't. Nobody, I think, even though Susan Miller has done a lot of work on Susan Miller. Susan, but not. But it's still we're just scratching the surface on Tangier, I think, on the North in general. On the North
There is
in
the
general.
new book on ethnography, an ethnography of Tangier.
And the Polish story of Tangier is huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. So my question is, there are people who resist the archives, and this I didn't want to write about my dad for years, and I collected so many stories about him, right? Over 120 hours of interviews, and he's got a really interesting story. But because of the racial part, the racial story, the racism, and then the slavery part, and I didn't want to write about it. I had to get to some level where I'm comfortable, and I'm comfortable. So probably I used Jewish story to tell my own story. You know, it's psychological. I think at some point you think about it. So and that's, I think, your story, what you're telling, what you said this morning, what you're saying now. I think it also highlights how everything is personal. It's really personal. I think at some point we go around, and I think from Ori's story, probably you haven't told Ronnie, you haven't told the personal story, but I think I think this morning we were talking. I think the personal story drives us. Whether we can take a detour and then come back to it, or we can go straight, taking a highway and then going straight to the destination. We always end up telling personal story. And that's, I think, the beauty of what we do, and of how we can learn from stories. And I think the moral of the story is that we probably better do it quickly before it's too long. I think that's
well, one thing is late. I mean, for my father is there are two died like 10 years ago, but still, I mean, I didn't leave a lot of. I mean, we did interview him, but he was not like that talkative about this stuff. I think one of the major thing was that he had this survivor's guilt. Because his entire family, large family, extended family, was killed in Auschwitz and in Treblinka, and he was like, you know, he would always say, "I was so lucky. You know, why was I so lucky? Why wasn't it just me?" And it's like him and his mother and brother and sister, but it's like something that's kind of way over him, and I think that's why when I asked him, "What did you do?" They said, "Oh, you know, like refugees, we went to the little cafe and we listened to the radio to see if there's anything new, and then we went to the beach." You know, like, okay, it sounds like fun, but you know, but then once in a while I said, "Oh yeah," and then the letters stopped arriving, and you know, it's like never wanted to kind of talk about their own. You know, they didn't tell everything. They always kind of, even my mother, she always found some kind of wonderful stories about how the nuns brought her hot chocolate during Christmas, and then it was like, you know, hot chocolate during the war was really difficult to attain, and it was like always the kind of the points of light, like in this, which were very small. So the stories kind of repeated themselves because there was not that many of them. So I should have maybe insisted, but you know, it's difficult because
It's not remarkable. I think stories are really context dependent. In my work, so many people, you know, went to a great show me how they felt so alienated from the Polish Jews. They couldn't believe they were showing, like, crying, and so different, and we are so, you know, different from them, and we pray the right way, and we are, you know, this Spanish pride. And I'm sure that was, you know, something that they made a point to when they talk to me. I'm sure they don't talk about this, you know, specific incident encounter the same way all the time. That was a specific context. So I think that's also something that we would keep in mind.
It's also the context of the age of the the person that remembers, and there were children. So
in the context of what is happening right now around them.
My father was born in No, it was
So
like
I resist. I resist the temptation of intervening with my own story because, and pass on. Thank you. Thank you.
I will start with about your personal stories that I didn't intend to tell you, but I see.
The personal turn of
I'm somewhat of the person to go to Poland, with the school. So all the family, we discuss about how you feel when we are a child, when we attended the ceremony. And my daughter, today 27 years old, said, it was almost mixed feeling because I feel that why I have not a relative in the Holocaust story. And so I told them that, my grandfather was not resigned from job, and my mother was expelled from the school. And my wife, Miriam, said, my uncle, Emile Termoni, was in Marseille, was arrested at Marseille, and was sent to Auschwitz. And so my daughter said, but why did you not tell me? Tell me the story. And I said, because we choose the moral of restraint. And I will tell you why I didn't intend to tell the story. Because when I heard David Wetstein dedicated this introduction to all his relatives, to all his parents and grandparents, I feel that in my 2-3 tragedies, I am not entitled to do it. And what is important in what you said, Omar, the problem is, and it's a problem that I have with your opinion, I have no any feeling of resentment toward the Ashkenazi hegemony on this story. I understand that it may be logic that we have to wait for half a century in order to feel not say proud, but to have the right to tell the story. And I will tell you, inside the Ashkenazi or the French, because I know more about the French history or the French Holocaust history. Children that were hidden in convents also felt that they are not entitled to tell the story. Because no, in fact, no, the Mizrahi, not your opinion, the Mizrahi, stand about the resentment. I mean, as you tell, and it was brilliant, when you say we may develop a politics of hope or maybe a politics of resentment. The trouble today is that we are not able to speak about the past without making on the center of the table the resentment. And for me, it's, a question of, it's the grace of time. There are things that you will not tell at this period of time. And after 10 years and 20 years, and what is important for me is that the period of the repressed didn't last enough. The end of this repressed period. And therefore, to look after what happened before, it's important to write this history. But more important for me is that today, we didn't convene this meeting at some time of the year, but of the year of the Day of Remembrance. It's for me the important act. It's the reason that I wanted to attend this meeting, because it was not planned on another day of the year, but especially today. And I think that our problem in Israeli society is that we are not able to look at the past with, more patient look, with more benevolence. I understand why the judges in the Supreme Court, of course, it's pity that, but what is important is that you are now telling the story, not in order to say this Ashkenazi elite, and it was this time, and now we are in other time.
Last year.
Yes.
Last year.
Okay.
Part of the narrative of I just want to make my my argument more accurate, because you mentioned it. I totally agree with you. And I myself say that I object the
Yeah.
entitlement of the Shoah to the Moroccan experience. And I understand the totality of the European experience. I don't use even the Ashkenazi, but the European experience of it. But what I'm trying to look, it's not about, and I started, I'm not judging the decision at all. And it's not a resentment, but it's another site where we can see it's not something that happened in the past, and now we move forward. Of course, in the academia, the fact that we are having this conference, of course, but for us as scholars, and maybe as Mizrahi scholars, we still feel, so it will relax when the reality will relax. And the reality, fortunately, concerning, yes, and narratives about hierarchies in the Israeli society, about entitlement to certain and approachment to certain sources of knowledge. So it's not relaxed. So for me, as a scholar, not as a Jew and not as a person, those things where politics and prejudice enters the way we think, it's all over. The Shoah is one case and one place that we can see those things, and it's one of the most places we can see. So what I'm suggesting is the hope to see it's hopeful to see resentments. So that's very much your.
Can I respond?
Yeah, please.
I love your point of you mentioned two words, the moral of restraint and the grace of time. And I think they speak also to some of the points that Ori mentioned in her second reflection, even though I think probably the scale of it somehow it differs. So I yesterday when I was waiting just to get my ticket at the airport in LA, and so I got just like not only coming to Israel but also just like out basically. You have to wait, you have to be questioned, and I'm used to it. So and then suddenly somebody asked me again to ask me. So it took me basically about 1 hour and a half just to get the ticket, and there's nothing. I understand it's nothing. And then to get to the customs about literally 3 minutes. To get, once I got here, it was quick because I didn't even get it. So I am, but my point, what I'm trying to say as far as the grace, which is really important, I think, in how we nurture these relationships, is that after they finished, you got two ladies came and said, "We really have to do this. We're really sorry. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for recognizing us." And I know they did their homework probably online. They checked and it was very moving for me. I'm serious, and I'm serious. I was very moved because here's somebody who's doing their job, and it doesn't mean I don't care about this, the good Arab, the bad Arab, who's good. And I intellectually, when you start thinking about all of these things, people will say, well, this is all about politics. For me, it's not. For me, that person is doing their job. So making sure that you are searched, you're not a problem person. At the end, they turn around and they say, thanks for recognizing us. And I think that's where time, patience, grace, with all the mess around us, that's what we can build. And it takes time. It's not a quick thing, but it takes time. And I think that's, for me, the justice you could do to the people who remember. You gotta take time, and you have to be patient. Oh, it's a Moroccan thing. I don't know if it's an Israeli thing, but
Not an Israeli thing, that definitely.
So I really I think it's really it's a powerful term, the grace of time and moral of restraint. It's really
translated in Hebrew, the Simon Weil theoretical thing. So I'm very acquainted with this idea of grace. It's about time we Israelis start practicing how to tell other people's story in the same excitement that make us, more, maybe to make the world better. Because I've been working with Armenian scholars and now I'm talking about the Holocaust from their perspective. And I learned so much about myself, my family. That's a really good practice. I actually, recommend it to anyone who's doing Israeli history. Even my personal story. I promise. One of my Ab's member, Chaim Bitton, who I think Rick knows very well, I'll spend the 5 minutes I have to talk about the shared research, if it's okay. Really in a nutshell. So I don't have enough time to present the complexity, but comes from an idea to talk about ISCO books. ISCO books written by European Jewish communities that were destroyed in the Holocaust and were actually, it was a common practice to do it after the communities were scattered throughout the world after the Holocaust. But in Israel, this is the context of this. I can't develop it too much, but until the 60s, I think the Eichmann's trial, there was kind of ambiguity toward those books because it aligned with the broader ambiguity of the world, emphasizing, victimhood, horrors, and the story went toward, emphasizing terrorism and so on and so forth. Now, this atmosphere eventually, led to the writing of comparable books among North Africans in Israel, even at a later stage, toward the turn of the century. And we started reading these books. Chaim did his work based on some of them, but we didn't look at the Holocaust specifically. And we started analyzing the way the Holocaust is being, observed from those books. About 40 books, like the one written by Yechiel Bentov and Machluf Turjaman. And
this is all in 10 years.
No. I'm talking about Morocco, the Moroccan perspective in Israel. From the Israeli perspective. Yeah, exactly. So yeah. And basically, thus far, because it's still in progress, perspectives of Israeli, that Moroccan Israelis were really involved in politics in the early years of statehood. Now, looking specifically at the Holocaust again, we found several outlines that actually echo what we tend to know, from the European books. First of all, there is this tendency to talk about the end of Jewish life, and tied very, very strictly with nostalgia toward Morocco, that's obviously, but also with the Second World War. That's the starting point when everything ended and we don't have any more, shared value with the society we're living in. And you tend to see various, variation and aspects of this, but that's something that really repeats. And also borrowing from the European context, from the world of European Jewry, such as, basically terminology such as ghettos and pogroms and anti-Semitism, which are broadly used in those books, but there are also dissimilarities. One example is the way the Muslim can be an assailant of a Jew, and also a neighbor, a good neighbor actually comes and helps. It's a very dualistic perspective. And another very interesting similarity that we emphasize is the way they tie their unpleasant experiences during the Holocaust with their unpleasant experiences in Israel. They're using it to talk about their marginalization in Israel, cultural and social marginalization, and also as a way to demand greater involvement in Israeli, it's a very Zionist perspective, I must say, but also one that brings a twist because you see repetitive against the Ashkenazi establishment, about their marginalization, about the specific, regional context they're working in, the road, Fakim, other places, and that's basically, again, in a nutshell, and it's a work in progress. So if you are interested in this, I'm
Chaim is also, very knowledgeable on this. Yeah, you know Chaim, because I think
of course.
you advised him. He was in. You guys are in the. No.
Unofficial advice.
Unofficial. Good.
If I could say, I think that a kind of a battle or tuning down of this discourse of competitive suffering is really an uphill struggle. And even if there's, it's a tendency at least in much of the academy, at least since over the last 15, 20 years, to emphasize a multi-directional, cosmopolitan, universal, or whatever, discourse of the Shoah. It's sort of, many political leaders and others haven't heard the news yet. And it's not North Africa, but this most recent last week proclamation of Israeli-Poland agreements on return of these youth group visits to Poland. If you look at the document, it is a triumphant battleground of national identities that has very little to do either with reconciliation or with reaching an understanding about the Shoah. It's about, who wins, who wins, who can tell a more complementary narrative about us, and then go on in business and diplomatic relations as usual, right? So it's a struggle, and I think at least certainly on the Israeli scene, but maybe not only, but right, even the title, the Holocaust and the African continent, is one that if we were to take all of the commemorations and even conferences that take place this year, it will be very much in the minority of the discourse. It's an uphill battle to reach that distance, to be able to say, okay, let's look at what the similarities are without being accused of desecration or of a blasphemy against the Holocaust victims and survivors. So
that's really interesting. I just started reading the memory monster.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yes, I agree.
Right in line with what you're saying.
Yeah. So you spoke about multi-directional memory. I want to add, well, my own personal story. The fact that I'm here and I have no direct connection to the Holocaust. I think that my students know the story because I tell it whenever I start a course on the Holocaust. And also, I think that maybe I will tell it because Henriette is here and she has a big part in this story. But I'll tell you that, I read the Diary of Anne Frank when I was 10 and became obsessive with the Holocaust. And then I went to Poland when I was 16. And I don't know, it was too early for me. I came back, I stopped eating. It was really devastating, but I was still very much obsessive with the Holocaust. And one thing that I remember was during my visit to Poland, there is this, every person has a name ceremony in Auschwitz where you need to go into this room full of candles and you need to bring, to read the names of your family members that did not survive the Holocaust. And I remember this feeling. It wasn't resentment. It was envy. I was so envy that I had no name to read. And, but I have to say, I never thought about it and I never actually spoke about it until my third year as a BA student, when I did a seminar with Henriette, and I chose to write. It was on a post-colonial theory, but I chose to write the seminar work on the Judenrat of Ghetto Warsaw. So on Adam Chernyakov, and I analyzed his diary through Spivak's article, not an easy one. And I actually remember, just so you understand how formative it was for me as a BA student, third year, sitting in Henriette's office, and she's asking me, well, why? Some chose to write about Facebook, some wrote about the cleaning personnel in the university, and I chose to write about Adam Chernyakov. And I told her the story about Auschwitz, and she said, you know, there is a thing called Holocaust and envies, and that was it. I felt like, well, now I know there is a name to what I felt. And there is a reason that I think that, you know, I found myself 10 years later here, more than 10, 13, here, you know, organizing this event. I wrote my master's on Holocaust memory in the struggle of African asylum seekers here in Israel. I submitted it in 2012. I wrote it here at the Politics and Government Department. And as I submitted it, I felt like I need to get away from the Israeli society. I can't write about the Israeli society, and I cannot write about a current thing, something that is still happening. So just think about 2012. African asylum seekers were deported. They were held in Cholot. They were like, everything was still happening. And so I said, well, South Africa sounds like interesting. It's easier. It was not, yeah. But then in South Africa, yeah, but then I have to say, in South Africa, I also had no direct connection. The only connection I had was through this university. I got a prize from Bertie Lavner, who was on the board of deputies here at the university, and his daughter told me about her experiences studying about the Holocaust during the apartheid years in high school. And I said, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. So, you know, I think that what I wanted to say is that, you know, it's not, there is resentment. You know, I think that when I teach about Mizrahi Jews and the Holocaust and Holocaust memory in Israel, I always show my students the Zaguri family. Yeah, so they have one of the, yeah. So there is one episode on the Day of Remembrance and how and this is resentment. And I can actually, when I see it, I think about my grandfather, because I can see him speaking about, you know, the ma'abarot, the transit camps, and his own experiences, and how it's related to. So there is resentment, but I think that it's not the only thing that there is here, and the fact that there is a very nationalistic narrative of the Holocaust that is so prominent for so many years, and we are still there, you know, and it structures those boundaries of the Holocaust that you cannot really, you know, actually widen or and it
2,000 to 6,000
even, but it's not even the money, but even in academia, look at the last report that was, what was it, 2 years ago, they reported the academic report on Holocaust studies in Israel. The focus was what? That, you know, there is not enough core Holocaust studies. There is too much margins. I am the margins, the one that is writing about memory, about Jews who were deported to Mauritius or South Africa. This is we are all the margins. But if the Israeli Academy Committee defines those boundaries and this periphery, so what can we do? So the only thing that we can do, I think, is to have those kind of conferences, yes, at the Holocaust Remembrance Day Eve, and to speak about those things, and to have courses, and to have students engaged in this issue. I think, you know, that's so.
I think when the book, the Holocaust and North Africa, when it was reviewed by
By this man. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
I saw 30 pages and I got scared. I literally got, I saw this is the introduction is about 25 pages. And then the review was 36 pages. And I called Sarah Stein. I told Sarah, I think I'm in trouble. And then she said, don't read it. Don't read the, so I had to read it. And I had to read it, but I was disappointed. I was really disappointed. I said, we, as a Moroccan, as a Muslim, as somebody who from a small oasis that's not even 1,000 people, I think we have a right to write about it. I would respect, I would never, it's very important for me, I would respect. Religion is important for me as a practicing Muslim, and I can see the Jewish story. I can see the relationship that when people tell me stories of Jews and Muslims and how they live together, whether sometimes they fought but in general, it's a positive story. I'm gonna respect that story. But for you to be the gatekeeper, I can't do this, or I have to do it your way. I have to do it your way. You're not doing a good service to Holocaust study. You're really undermining Holocaust study, and that's exactly why I did this. Mm-hmm. And then I have other ideas what I want to do, other things, but I have to be. I just want them, people at Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Memorial Museum and other institutions, to know that we are on their side. We want to help them. We want to really help them push that, and that's the bottom line. The bottom line is that we want to help you. We will never undermine your mission, but you have to open up the space. You can't look like this. It doesn't work. You have to open up. You have to take out the blinkers and then by law, those zooms that bigger that you can see the whole landscape. And that's what the struggle. And I think when I look at I like to go to Yad Vashem's meetings all the time and look at what they're doing. It's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. Yeah. It's the same stuff. It's hard. As somebody who believes that we have to do more research on the Holocaust, heartbreaking to see the same stuff.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
Because I know that we have a lot of time.
We'll take up to 5 minutes more, and then we'll take a break. But please,
because Ronnie mentioned it. Yeah. I would like to share with you an experience that made me write a whole article, an entire article, and that's the confusion of the younger generation when they come after a Holocaust day of school, and they don't understand what's going on. So this 6 years old child comes to her mom. You know the story because you heard the article by me, and she asked her mother, "Mommy, how many uncles we lost in the Holocaust?" And that mother says, "No one." Then Shlomit, the little girl says, "Then we are not Jewish." Then the mother says, "No, we are Jewish, but we are Mizrachis." And she tells me, this 6 years old child, when she became my friend at her 20s or something, she tells me, this is what made me understand the issue of the confusion of the Holocaust. And the question is, when are we entitled to touch the trauma? And when this comes up, then I remember Frantz Fanon. So what I want to make here as a point is that there is a chain of traumas that goes on in discourse. And as long as we leave these traumas going on in discourse, then perhaps we can speak of non-consent and disconsent or
comparison, or even not comparison.
Exactly. So I think that we are here it's not even a memory. we're going on within a political discourse. And this political discourse should be, as you ended, opened in the horizons. I think if we remember Shlomit with her innocent question, that helps to open up to touching the traumas, whether you are a Mizrahi in the transition camp or you are a Holocaust daughter of a survivor.
Just a last remark, because I heard, because I was so touched by this story and from our own experience. And my son, I came to my father, but by the year of 12, I told him I cannot write the Shorashim project roots in school because you didn't do anything here. I mean, because that's what I was taught. You weren't Chalutz, you weren't in the Shoah, so you have nothing to tell me. And then he made me to sit. You're not going to school today, and he taught me about our Moroccan legacy. So this started the whole issue. But I just, as a scholar, I would love to have a conversation about how we use the Holocaust, because it's not just to enlarge the space we study the Holocaust and the subject, but also the Holocaust is the way to study other injustices, and it's not legitimized. And this is the most important thing for me. So how we can legitimize to use Holocaust in order not to compare, but to enlarge our empathy to human suffering.
That's in many ways an uphill struggle, even greater than, or at least as great as the one that Henriette described, because of the older one of the child who comes home after Tu B'Shvat Arbor Day and asks, "Mommy, who did we fight against on Arbor Day?" Because we didn't, right? What is there to commemorate? And so that, you know, and that brings us, you know, back into the heart of, you know, memory and the way it's used in certainly in the Israeli political situation, but not only. And you know, the powers of both of nationalism and of saying, well, you know, who has the greater victim card that they can use in order to put on the table in order to get recognition and rights. I would say is far more difficult to combat now than when people wrote these optimistic scenarios 20 years ago. It seems like a long time ago, about, you know, the global paradigms and and empathy through understanding the suffering of others. But I think that's part of our job and doesn't contradict, you know, our search for historical truth. Let's take a thank you to all. Can we?
Very quickly, I'd like to just mention that the Israeli narrative is sometimes being exported. Something that came up to my mind. I read a booklet from Venezuela, Moroccan Jews writing in Venezuela about how we have our own Holocaust. Do you know what was the extortion from Spain? So it's very raveling in a way.
Thank you very much to all of you. And we'll take a break.
I just remind you all, that at 5 o'clock we will start the screening of the Atlantic Drift, which is a documentary on Mauritius, on the deportation to Mauritius. So it's expanding the boundaries of the African continent, but
And again, for those not stay, remind you, we'll be here tomorrow starting 11 o'clock till about 2:30. We have